Hello, everyone. Welcome back once again to Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible Study on the book of 2 Corinthians. Today we're discussing chapter 8 in 2 Corinthians. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana, and I think I'm starting to get a little bit of a cold. So if my voice sounds a little bit off to you, that is probably why. I've avoided it for so long, but pastors, we get sick. Spent some time making hospital calls, so that's a place for germs. Anyway, if you're looking for last week's study, if you missed that one, I'll put that link up above and you can follow that one all the way back to the beginning. You can even also check out the playlist on our YouTube channel. Please don't forget to give us a thumbs up or share the video or even subscribe to the channel if you appreciate these, because that helps other people see that and take advantage of that as well. We don't get monetized or anything like that, so it's just about getting the word out. Thank you for studying along with us. Let's get into chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians. We see this title. Now, remember, these titles that are in your Bible or even online in this online Bible are not part of the original scriptures. They're added in for ease of use and summary, well as these chapter headings, as well as the verses. And in some manuscripts, they were written before Greek even had capital letters. So you can imagine that looking at a page of just word after word after word with no capital letters, no punctuation, by the way, no indentation, no chapter headings, no verses, that it would be kind of difficult to figure out where one thought ended and another began. So later on, the church has added these things in order for ease of use and to be able to tell other people who are trying to study along with you, hey, go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 4, and there we read that. So anyway, just be aware of those sorts of things. I don't mean to insult you by telling you things. I just find that a lot of people don't know things because pastors never talk about them. And so I'm just trying to put it out there for anybody that might not know. Verse 8, what did Paul actually write? Verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 1. We want you to know, brothers, okay, so he's still writing to the Corinthians, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. Now, in the previous chapter, Paul had talked about how difficult his trip to Macedonia was, that there was difficulties within, there's fear and doubt, and that there also had a lot of persecution on the outside. We actually looked at some of that last time. But Paul here is saying that even though the work was tough, it produced a lot of fruit, as is the case with just about anything. So I tell my kids, pretty much any young person that, well, old people too, I tell them, like, almost always, the easy way is not the right way. I follow that sort of adage in home repair and remodeling. They make all kinds of products that will make, I don't know, caulking your tub easy. Well, that's because it's a terrible job to cut all that out and to wipe off the silicone and get it nice and clean. And then you got to fill the tub with water. That's a secret. Fill the tub with water before you put the caulk on. Why? Because the weight of the water separates that gap between the tub and the tile. You get that caulk in there, right? And then when the water goes out, it comes back up and it squishes that tight. If you do it the other way, when that gap widens up because of the weight of the water in the tub, then it separates and you get water underneath. So there's a little handyman secret for you. Fill your tub with water before you put the caulk around it. Anyway, that job is awful. I hate doing it, right? So they make these products that suppose you just press and those don't work, okay? The hard way, the labor-intensive way is the only way to do that. So be aware of the easy way around, right? So almost anything that has value is going to take hard work and is going to come with struggle. The work of the Lord is no different. And Paul here is saying that, yeah, we had a lot of trouble in Macedonia, but I want you to also know what great things God did there. He continues, verse 2, for in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty. Notice abundance of joy and poverty go together. That's wild, because that's not the message of the world that we live in. The message of the world that we live in is that wealth and joy go together. It's not poverty and joy. But here we're seeing a secret that the real way through life is actually upside down than what the world presents you. So their abundance of joy and extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord. So they are giving generously to this. What are they giving to? Well, to understand that, it really has to do with Acts 11. So if we go back to Acts 11, so now in these days, so this is after Christ's resurrection from the dead, the church is brand new, all right? Prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them named Agabus stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine over all the world. And then Luke gives us this note that he said it would happen, and then he gives us this note, and it did in the days of Claudius. And we can kind of go back and date that, and there's records of that, I believe. So the disciples determined, everyone according to his ability, to send relief to the brothers living in Judea. So here we're going to have the churches that were less affected by this famine contribute to those in Jerusalem that are really struggling. You also have a collection for the widows in Jerusalem going on. We assume that one of the reasons that became a problem is because the persecution of Christians, at that time they believed it to be a weirdo Jewish sect, all right, not actually its own religion, but this sort of thing. But that persecution of those people who followed the way left a lot of widows, okay? The disciples, almost all of them, were martyred for their faith, and we assume, and we know that Peter had a family, and we assume the other ones did as well. So they needed support. So the churches around Jerusalem and other parts would send relief. They would take up a door offering, as it were. And now Paul is traveling around collecting that to bring it back to Jerusalem. Why? Because it's what they decided to do. Paul isn't doing this on his own. They did so, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Saul. So they determined who is going to be entrusted with this money. That's because, as we read in previous chapters, apparently there was a lot of con artists going around at this time. We read in the Didache that there's actually rules about how you should treat someone that comes to you claiming to be a prophet. You know, let him stay for a day, give him bread, but if he asks for money, he's a charlatan, right? If he stays longer than a day or two, then he's probably a charlatan as well. All of those sorts of things. So this was a problem in the early church. So they designated the who would take it, and that it would be going from Paul and Barnabas to the elders of the church, and there it would be distributed amongst those who had need. So this was a plan of the early church. We read about it in Acts, and now we're seeing Paul doing that in 2 Corinthians. He comes to the churches in Macedonia. He says, hey, we're taking up a collection for the people in Jerusalem because of this famine and also because of the persecution. And they're like, well, we don't have much, but we will give. And Paul says that they gave abundantly or generously. This is kind of a life lesson that I've discovered. I've found that often the people who don't have much can be the most generous. And maybe that's because the people who have a lot because they don't give it away to anybody. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But I often find that when I go to visit people who I know don't have a lot, right? And they say, well, Pastor, I went to the store and I got this for our, I got coffee and I got this cake and I got this pie. And I'm like, you didn't have to do that. That's quite all right. But that's their expression of that. And I've learned to just say thank you and let them be that way. Let them be generous, because it kind of knocks people down if you don't. But sometimes you wish that they would save a little for themselves, like you don't need to give it all away, save a little for yourselves. But there is something about that. Again, the upside down world, you don't have much, but you give much. Certainly, this was the praise of Jesus for the widow who put in her 2 copper coins into the temple treasury. That wasn't about the amount. Rather, it was the trust in God to continue to provide that Jesus was praising, that she gave all that she had to live on. God does not expect you to empty your bank account and give it to the church, okay? probably don't do that, because he's also called you to be a good steward of the resources, and he's called you to take care of your family and take care of yourself. And so, but there is a percentage and a portion and a way to give to God. We can talk about that some other time. But God isn't demanding that you empty your bank account and give it to the church. So that's not what we learn from the widow's mite. What we learn is that the widow had a trust in God to provide for her. And so she wasn't counting on this little money that she had. She gave it just assuming that God would take care of her. That's what God praises. And that's really what offerings are about. I mean, if you think in the Old Testament, if you were a farmer and you harvest your crop, you would take 10% of that. And if you're doing it right, you'd take the 10 best bushels, 10% best bushels, or the best grain, or the best apples. You want the best 10%. And before you sit down and have your first harvest meal or celebration or put it in your barn, you go out to the Lord's altar and you burn it. And the world looks at that, you dummy, you just wasted the best part of everything. And also, you don't know if there's going to be a famine. You don't know if you're going to need that. And you're burning it. And God, why does God need your grain? Why does he want you to burn it? It has nothing to do with God needing grain or liking the smell of toasted oats or anything like that. It has to do with a trust in God. So we give to God our first fruits. It's a sacrificial portion. It's not just what's left over, and it's not a meager amount. We want to give generously. Old Testament requirement was 10%, but that isn't, we're not limited to that. Sometimes 10% is sacrificial. Sometimes 2% is sacrificial. Sometimes 20% is sacrificial. It just depends upon your situation. Each man must determine in his heart what he is about to give, right? That's because between you and God alone. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Sound no trumpet before you. All of those sorts of things. But God also loves a cheerful giver. So you're supposed to be sacrificial and generous and first fruits and also cheerful about it. But you are to burn it before you know if you're going to need it, because it's a statement of trust that God will provide in that year. Okay? So that's really what offerings are all about. And here we're talking about these people that don't have a lot but are being very generous, so much so that Paul remarks about their overflowing generosity for people in need. This is a biblical thing, and it's worth being praised. We see in we just had it. Let me come back here. We just had it. If you are on the 3-year series for the 7th Sunday after the Epiphany, you heard the gospel from Luke chapter 6. And at the end, you have these words: judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Here, the Bible gives us this impression that if you are generous to others, they will, the world, the universe will be generous to you. The Bible says, what you sow, you shall reap. But this chapter here also says, lend and expect nothing in return. So you're not supposed to go around thinking, well, if I help this person and I help them generously, I'll get that back. It'll be a good investment. You're missing the point of what God is saying here. Okay? We are to be generous because that's what we are to do. We're not to be concerned about what we have, what we might get, or what we might lose, because God will provide. That's the entire point of offerings and sacrifice and all of it. Okay? So we're not to look at this as be generous, it's to get back generosity. It's not karma. I hate that. What you sow, you shall reap is the closest you get to karma. Karma is a Hindu concept tied to a lot of different things. So, yeah. But the Bible does say that what you sow, you will reap. If you're mean to everybody around you, you're probably going to have them be mean back to you. That's just common sense. So the people in Macedonia were generous, and it was a spiritual gift. And Paul praises them for that, even though they didn't have very much. So even though it was a struggling time, even though the church was poor, Paul has a lot to rejoice about at the churches in Macedonia. All right. Verse 4, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Okay, if you go to a congregation, right, and you sit there through service, you give your offering, okay, good for you. Bring an offering and come into his courts. How often do you do that? Well, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. How often does the Sabbath day roll around? Every week. So every week you bring an offering, okay? That's just how it works. Now, so you do that, good for you. But at the end, then the pastor gets up and says, oh, by the way, we're having a door offering to benefit our local food pantry or our missionary in Africa or the seminary student that we're sponsoring. And you kind of go, maybe you don't do that. Maybe you feel it in your, like, I just gave and now you're asking me for more. Like, and then you look through your wallet and you're like, well, what do I got? So I got a 20. Well, I'm not putting a 20 in there. I got a 10, but that was going to be for my coffee. Pastor Eric's got $2. That's all. Well, that's what I'll give. My 2 copper coins, and that's all I have to live on. That's not true. So we give what's left over. I mean, this what Paul is describing, that the people were begging for the opportunity to give more to this door offering. That's foreign to a lot of us. So this is truly the work of the Holy Spirit amongst the Macedonian churches. Paul recognizes this, and he even says, and this not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, meaning they dedicated themselves to following what God wanted and listening and learning and growing in the faith. And then, by the will of God, also to us. So they were receptive to what we were trying to do for the churches, and it was amazing. So accordingly, we urge Titus. Titus returns here. We've been talking a lot about Titus. He was the one that carried that severe letter to the Corinthians. Paul rebuked them. Titus was to oversee what would happen. Titus tried to connect with Paul, but they missed each other, and then later on they connect when they were at Troas. I don't remember. But they did come back, and Titus shared with Paul the good news that the Corinthians did exactly what they were supposed to do. They listened, they grew, they forgave. They're just spiritual giants here. They just did a fantastic job. That's the message that Paul hears from Titus. So Paul refers to Titus again. We urge Titus that as he had started, so when he came with the severe letter, apparently he started laying the groundwork for this door offering to benefit the saints in Jerusalem. So he should complete among you this act of grace. So apparently Titus is coming back to the church at Corinth, this time to do phase 2 of their fundraising for the saints, okay? Verse 7, but as you excel in everything, Paul is buttering up the Corinthians here a little bit, right? In faith and speech and knowledge and all earnestness and in our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. Now that sounds like a command, doesn't it? See that you do this and do it well. Well, it is. Paul is encouraging them in his own way. Paul often does this. He butters up the congregation. He praises them for being greater saints than they actually are, because if they were those types of saints, he wouldn't be writing to them in the first place to correct their problems. But Paul here says this is how you should be. Their reaction is, oh, I'm not that way. And then Paul says, but that's the way you should be, and I'm sure that you can do this. So he's given a little bit of manipulation here. I'm going to call it that. I know that's a very derogatory term, but he's using rhetorical methods and his knowledge of people to sort of shame them into doing the right thing. I will confess that there are sermons that I preach that way. So you get up there and you say, like, I know that you're all on your Bible study reading plans and you're probably doing that every day and it's clicking along just well. And then you see people that look at you and they go, yeah, so I never really started that, Pastor, but okay. Now I know that, right? But I'm trying to encourage you that this is what Christians do, right? So this is a method that's used in the Bible, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it because it is biblical. But it is a little bit, and I'll use this term again, manipulative, as he praises them for doing these things and then sort of says, hey, keep doing it, right? So there's a little bit of manipulation, but it's leading to encouragement. Okay. But then we see right here in verse 8, he says, I say this not as a command. Okay. So Paul recognizes they're going to hear this as a command and they're going to make it into a law that they have to give to this door offering. And if they don't, I'm going to be angry. I don't want them to misconstrue that. So he scales it back. He says, I'm not saying this is a command, right? But to prove by the earnestness of others that your love is genuine. He's saying this is an opportunity for you to show your faith inside, to put your trust in the Lord, to be generous to those who are in need, and because it's the right thing to do, right? And now he's going to talk about why it is, the example of Jesus. So we'll get there. So a while back, before Redeemer ever started our building project, we're still going through with that, by the way. Hopefully demolition right around Easter, right after Easter 2025, with completion right before Christmas. We'll see. But if you would like to donate to that, we do have a link probably in the comments down below that you can go to our website and give, if you like what Redeemer is doing. Thank you for that. But here we have the earnestness and the right thing to do that Paul is trying to get them to do. Now, long before Redeemer had their building project, we got a letter from a church down in Tennessee, I think, that was just starting. They had been meeting in this building, and they started raising funds to turn it into a church. And they were a new congregation. They only had like 50 or 60 people. They raised all the money, right? And they started construction. And then after they had the building almost complete, the city came by and said, well, wait a minute, you need to have a culvert under this section of your property here. And they're like, well, you didn't tell us that. Well, we didn't know. Like, all this back and forth, right? How much is that going to cost? Oh, like $80,000. So now all of a sudden you added $80,000 on top of what they were already struggling to provide. And so this church sent out letters all around, and we got one. Now, I don't know anybody at that church. I've never been there, but I encouraged our people to have a door offering and say, hey, this is biblical. We help each other out. We're not in competition with these churches. We're supposed to be working together. But that's not how we often are. If people leave our congregation to go to the Lutheran church, the next town over, we're incensed about that. But I'm just, good for you. I'm glad you're going to a Lutheran church. Have at it. So this is biblical. And people ask me, a couple of people say, Pastor, why are we doing this? We need to start, because we were just starting to talk about our own building problems. And we actually went to Luke chapter 6, and I talked about that. I said, well, maybe our giving and supplying their need now will turn around when we are in that sort of a situation. Now, I don't know that church has contributed to our building fund after they built their thing, and I think they're doing just fine. God bless them. I don't know if they've turned around to repay that or more, because that's what it's. More will be returned in my lap. Isn't that what we learned? Yeah, it's not an investment, people. So maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But we've met our goal too. And so I think that, there's something biblical and something beautiful about churches working together without expecting anything in return, and the Lord provides. So anyway, this is all kind of going on here, and it's kind of neat to see that the things that they did in the early church are still going on here, that you have an opportunity to help your churches around you, and we'd like to see greater cooperation amongst our congregations, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of you need the right people in the right places to plan those sort of things. But maybe that's you. Maybe that's how you can serve. So I say this not as a command. You don't have to give to this door offering to be a Christian, but I want you to consider that this is what Christians do. Your love is genuine. For look at him. This is that manipulation again, right? You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. Great reversal. And in this matter, I give my judgment. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. I'm not asking you to do something that you don't want to do. In fact, you already started collecting this. So let's keep at it. So Paul is pulling out all the stops here to convince them. This is the capital giving campaign of Paul here, right? He's talking to them and saying, we've already started to do this. Let's finish it, and let's finish it well. So now finish doing it as well, so that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. Paul's saying you don't need to give billions of dollars here, but this is something that benefits you. You think that your giving to the people in Jerusalem is for their sake, but really the benefit is in your giving in the first place. Of you saying, I don't need to hoard all of my resources for me. God will take care of me, and through me, I can take care of these people. That's a lesson for the giver, not the receiver. And as the Bible says, it is more blessed to give than receive. I do not mean, Paul has to clarify this again, I do not mean that others should be eased and you be burdened. So he's not saying, I don't want you to go hungry because this person is in need. Do what you can. Again, I mentioned before that we're not called to sell all we have and give it to the church, because God has made you a good steward of what he has given you, and you have your own responsibilities. You also have a brain that God gave you. All right. So you must determine in your heart what it means to give. And the only real guidance that God gives about that in the scriptures is that you should give generously, that you should give regularly, that you should give of your first fruits, that you should give a sacrificial amount. I usually tell people that's like something that you're kind of on the edge of saying that might be a little too much. There you're at sacrificial level, all right? If I had a little bit of that back, I could, replace the water heater this summer. But that's where we're at, okay? Not just the $2 that you got spare in your wallet here. A sacrificial offering. And then we're supposed to give discreetly without sounding a trumpet, and we're also supposed to give cheerfully. Those are the biblical principles for giving an offering, whether that's to church or to charity or to someone else. And Paul here is clarifying, I do not mean that you should be put out by your trying to help this person, but do what you can, okay? But that, as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness. Churches working together, all in it together, the body of Christ together, a left arm and a right arm, right? You break your left arm, well, your right arm is going to be doing things that your left arm used to do, right? And then you sprain your right wrist after that, and now you're using your left hand to do things. That's how we work. But we think of our congregations as insular, like this is just mine, and the church exists only in these four walls. That's dangerous for any congregation, to be honest. If you were searching for a church, and I don't care, well, I do care what denomination, but I'm just saying across denominations, look for a church that no matter what their budget is, right, they have a part of their spending directed outside of themselves. Here at Redeemer, I try to have a local mission and an international mission, okay? So there's something that we're doing locally, and then there's something that we're doing, worldwide. And we direct almost all of our attention to those adopted missions. That means that we have to say no to a lot of really good causes that want to come in and say, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? I dislike when they say, well, we'll preach for you. And then instead of a sermon on Jesus, I get a sermon on giving to whatever thing they're doing, which is a wonderful mission, but it's not what I came to church to hear. So I generally don't let them do that. But we try to focus and put our effort towards that. Redeemer is not a large congregation, although I did discover, hold on. This is the latest issue of the Lutheran Witness, which is our synod's official publication magazine. And in here, it talks about a survey of the congregations. And it says that 40 to 45% of LCMS congregations have fewer than 50 people attending. So Redeemer is about 135 right now. So that puts us in the 15th percentile. This is a medium-sized congregation. That's crazy. But churches are getting smaller and that sort of thing. So budgets get tighter, and then they start to circle the wagons, and we have to say we have to keep that money here. But that's not good. We are supposed to. We are directed to look outside of ourselves. So if you're trying to find a church, I would find one that just whatever their resources are, that they have an eye for some sort of reaching out, mission work, mercy work, outside of themselves. Okay, and that's kind of important. But that's just my opinion. I say this not as a command, as Paul says. All right. Their abundance may supply your need, and that there may be fairness. Verse 15, as is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over. Whoever gathered little had no lack. Now, if you were a Jew, you would know exactly where that verse came from. Because it's from Exodus. It's from the story, the history of the Exodus and the manna. So if you go to Exodus chapter 16, verses 13 through 21, we have this. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, dew lay around the camp. So originally they just had this manna, right? But then they grumbled. I love that verse because they say, oh, there's no food, and we hate this worthless bread that falls from the sky and feeds us every day. They say there's no food, and then in the same sentence, they talk about how they hate the food that God is miraculously providing for them every day. That's concupiscence. That is the internal lust for sin. That is the sinful nature of people, right? That is a petulant teenager standing in front of the fridge that's full of things saying there's nothing to eat, right? So that's just how people are. So they complained, and then God sent them meat, right? So in the evening, they get meat. In the morning, they have dew. And when the dew has gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. I mean, obviously, it's literally bread from heaven. This has never happened before. Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of persons that each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. So even there, magical bread, miraculous bread, let's use miracles instead of magic. Miraculous bread from heaven falls. Your leader, okay, who unleashed plagues on Egypt, split the Red Sea, gave you water to drink from a rock, tells you you should gather this much, okay? What do they do? Well, some people go, well, I'll gather this much. And some people are like, I don't gather this much. Why not just do what the miraculous leader told you to do? Israel, they boggle the mind, all right? So they gathered some more and some less. But then they measured it with an omer. Whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. God corrected their greed or their lack of trust in his provision, their meagerness. He corrects it both ways, and he says, well, all right, I see what you did there, but guess what? You're all going to have enough. You're all going to have daily bread. It's going to be enough. So God is like, okay, you collected this much. Well, you're going to be fine. So God does this. All right. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. 19. Now Moses is going to tell them another rule. Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over till the morning. Do not hoard this. Trust in God for daily bread. daily provision. Do not say, oh, what if God doesn't give us food tomorrow? We better save some of this for them. Moses is saying, do not do that. What do? But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. God is like, oh, you think you're going to save it? Well, guess what? There you go. Try eating that, right? And Moses was angry with them. I love that. Moses' trip through Exodus is one of just boneheaded frustration after frustration. Just a whole lot of face palming. Like, I can't believe these people did this. I literally told them, God is going to rain food from the sky, gather this much, no more, no less, don't keep it till morning, and they do not listen at any turn. You know, it's no wonder that Moses comes to God and say, did I birth all these people that I have to keep track of them? I'm tired of them. Israel is frustrating. Morning by morning, they gathered it, each as much as you could eat, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. So daily provision. But here we have this verse, whoever gathered much had nothing left over. Whoever gathered little had no lack. Paul is familiar with this, being a Jew. He is writing to a lot of his fellow Jews who would be like, oh yeah, so giving our money to the people in Jerusalem, you know, God is going to provide. We shouldn't try to hoard it for a rainy day. Okay. So, all right. That's how they are set up to give. Whoever gathered much had nothing left over. Whoever gathered little had no lack. All right. Now that Paul has done all that, he is going to send them Titus once again. He writes, but thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same earnest care I have for you. For he not only accepted our appeal, but being himself very earnest, he is going to you of his own accord. So Titus was dispatched with the severe letter. That severe letter had its desired effect. Titus came back to Paul and announced, hey, they did exactly what you told them to do, and it's been a great blessing. And I love these people, man. And Paul says, okay, well, while you were there, did you mention to them that we were collecting this money for the saints in Jerusalem? And Titus is like, yeah, you know, I was trying to sort out everything that they had going wrong, but I did mention that, and they started to have a few offerings and door offerings, and I think the elders got it locked away in their safe or something like that. And Paul says, well, you know, we need to kind of do more here. And Titus says, well, I'll go back and I will talk to them again, and I'll pick that up. Because it was such a great experience the first time, I'd love to go back. Paul says, this is fantastic. I had to write to them and send Titus because things were bad, and now Titus is excited about going back and asking them for money. Great. It's not what I like to do, but Titus is just encouraged. He's incredibly encouraged by the Corinthians, which is great. It's beautiful. Titus is not going on his own. All right, so now we have some mysteries. Verse 18, with him we are sending the brother who is famous among all the churches for his preaching of the gospel. Now, we do not know who this brother is. Is it Apollos? I don't think so. Is it some unnamed disciple? Possibly. Is it one of the 12? Possibly. The best guess seems to be that this brother, who is famous among all the churches, is Luke. Now, Luke was not one of the 12 disciples, okay? But he was involved in the ministry very early on. In fact, I think it's in Acts 16:10. Let's go there. So the book of Acts is written by Luke. He says that in the very first chapter. And in Acts 16:10, and when Paul had seen this vision, immediately we sought to go on into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So in this verse, Luke here says that I went with Paul to preach the gospel in Macedonia. So that's the reason why here in 2 Corinthians 8, we are guessing that this brother who is famous among all churches for preaching the gospel is probably Luke. Now, we could talk about Luke some other day, but Luke is a really interesting person He was a physician. He had impeccable Greek. Um, he also was sort of the reporter. So, having not been an eyewitness to all the events of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, he gathered them up from talking to people who were. And so Luke goes around and Luke gives us details that nobody else in the Gospels does. And Luke includes names so that you could be a good journalist and follow up. He tells us, this person's name is so and so, and they are with us to this day. Malchus, who had his ear cut off, right? You could go look up Malchus and say, "Did Jesus really put your ear back on?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, check it out." Luke also has internal thoughts that you would only gather if someone told you this is what I was thinking at the time. So we have a very good evidence in Luke's writings that he interviewed Mary, the mother of our Lord, because Luke records things that only she would know about what she was thinking and pondering in her heart, those sorts of things. So you can imagine as Luke goes around and talks to all these people in churches, gathering them together like a reporter, an investigative reporter, and then he's also preaching about this and telling people this information that they are not getting anywhere else, that might have led to some minor fame within the churches. So all of that seems to fit together, and this brother who is famous among all the churches for preaching the gospel is probably, most likely, possibly Luke. Okay? So Luke is going with Titus. Let's just settle that. And not only that, but he has been appointed by the churches. So the churches have given Luke their seal of approval for doing these sorts of things. Again, because you have a lot of charlatans running around at this time. He has been appointed by the churches to travel with us as we carry out this act of grace that is being ministered by us for the glory of the Lord himself and to show our goodwill. Paul here is saying, like, hey, I'm not the only one that's gathering these funds. We have a concentrated effort here, and God is helping us along. Now, there's going to be a demonstration of transparency here because Paul is aware that there are charlatans out there that are trying to take advantage of churches, and he doesn't want to be included in that. So he says, we take this course so that no one should blame us about this generous gift that is being administered by us. Paul isn't the only one with access to the account, okay? There's some transparency here. A countersigner on the checking account, as it were. This needs to be because apparently, again, there were people trying to fleece other churches and Christians. Still going on today, by the way. You really haven't made it as a Lutheran pastor until somebody has impersonated you over text message to your members asking for gift cards. Every once in a while, I will get people like saying, hey, I got a text message from you saying you need an Apple gift card for somebody in need. I'm like, nope. Emails too, how they get a hold of this information, all that information is out there. Our newsletter does not have names of people listed. We don't have a directory online. Our website does have an option to have a secure directory, but how secure is that directory? But people just through searching your social media can find out, that every Sunday they post that they're here at Redeemer Lutheran Church and go to the church's website. Oh, here's the pastor's name. And okay, I'll create a fake account. And then I found this person's number on the dark web. Okay, let's see if that's still current. And then they just text you and say, hey, I need help and that sort of thing. I can't talk. I'm in a meeting. I love that one. That's happened to me 2 or 3 times. Even happened to the president of our synod for a while. These people are low lifes, right? Use that ingenuity to do something positive, people. But criminals are going to be criminals. So anyway, this was going on back then, and it's still going on today. People trying to fleece churches. And so Paul builds in some transparency into this, what will become a very large and generous gift to the churches struggling in Jerusalem. We aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man. And with them, we are sending our brother. So there's another person going. It's not just Titus. It's not just Luke. But now we have this other brother whom we have often tested and found earnest in many matters, but who is now more earnest than ever because of his great confidence in you. We have no idea who this is. No idea, or at least I don't. Um, it's so general, and it's just hard to piece together who this was. Barnabas, I don't know where Barnabas was at this point. Um, Mark, some guy, Gary, is it Gary? Gary's probably going, I don't know. It doesn't give us that. But when they show up with Luke and Titus, you'll know that, okay, this is the guy that's been tested and vetted by Paul, okay? And he's excited about going to Corinth too. As for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker for your benefit. So this is Paul lending his credence to Titus once again. Not that he probably has to do this at this point, considering Titus's work amongst the Corinthians, but Paul here is just sort of reminding them that, hey, treat him well, and he has my full authority to do what I would do if I were there. So if you respect me, respect him. As for our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. So give proof before the churches of your love and of our boasting about you to these men. Don't let me down, Corinthians. I've boasted about you. I said that you're generous. I said that you're loving. I said that you're wonderful. I'm sending these guys to you. Don't make me a liar. Paul is a little stern and bold in how he writes to them. But he's careful that they don't turn it into, we must obey Paul or we're going to hell kind of a thing. All right. He consistently says whenever he tells them to do something, this is not a command. It's not an apostolic mandate. All right. I'm just telling you what you should do because it's good, right, and salutary. And Paul says, hey, giving to this project, this relief of the saints, is what Christian churches should do. It's beneficial to you, and it benefits the church at large. And I know that you have an interest in this because you've already started to do it with Titus. So they're coming, treat them well, do your best, and let's all rejoice and help out the people in Jerusalem. Let's be together. So Paul here is healing the Corinthian church, not only in their own building, in their own walls, and their own membership. He's healing them into the greater body of Christ, saying that you have an opportunity to help out people, and you begged me for this opportunity before. Now let's do it again because it's beneficial not only to you, but to everyone. If we had that mind amongst our churches, amongst our congregations, in our own synods or your own whatevers, greater cooperation, I think things would be better. But we get so insular, and we want our church, our pastor, and I don't care if there's only 10 people here. I don't want to combine with that church that also only has a handful of people and can't afford their pastor like we can't afford ours. And if we came together, then we could actually have a medium-sized congregation. But which building? And they both say, well, ours, because we're so tied to those buildings, right? So that's difficult. It's difficult when you have a congregationalist structure, and congregations are, for the most part, autonomous about what they do with their property. The synod can't come in and tell us that this church is closed or that this pastor needs to move over here. Other denominations do operate that way, but in the Missouri Synod, the congregation has autonomy. It's just they've agreed to operate by a certain number of rules and regulations in order to be part of the synod. And so we're walking together. That may not be interesting to you at all, but that's one of the ways that our denomination is organized. And for the most part, it works out very well, except when you have congregations that are so tied to what they have that they would rather close than combine with 1, 2, 3, in some cases 4 congregations in the same area within 10 miles of each other to have a functioning, beautiful, full congregation that can once again be about the ministry together, right? Instead of just circling the wagons and trying to hold on for as long as they can. Just my opinions. But if we had greater cooperation, maybe that might ease some of that possessiveness about our building. So in our circuit, we do have circuit-wide events. We Ascension Day service, so Reformation service. We used to do pulpit exchanges for like Lent. We still have our circuit meetings every month where the pastors get together. We have a worship service where the pastors get to hear a fellow pastor preach to them. So we're working on that spirit of cooperation, and it's a beautiful thing. Encourage your church and your pastor to be part of that. It's beneficial. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for studying along with me. Next week, we'll be back for 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And really, truly appreciate you spending time and working through the word of the Lord with me here, wherever you may be. God's blessings, and I'll see you next week.